Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about my Landslide Trample Druid. Now this build has a ton of AoE and a ton of damage, and it has some really great upsides versus some of the heavy hitters like Tornado and Pulverize, and that upside is mostly in accessibility. I came into Druid wanting to play Tornado, but I didn't have the items. Now, I tried to get into Pulverize, I didn't have the items. What did I have items for? This build. And it carried my ass all the way from level 54 to now at this point 88. But let's talk about what's actually going on here. Well, we are using Trample. This is a movement skill basically where it shapeshifts you into a werebear and then you charge forward. Usually very low damage, but we combine it with a few certain legendary aspects. So for example, if I trample here, you will see that all of these landslides are being cast. How does this work? Well, we have this legendary power right here. Trample now summons 6 landslide pillars of earth during its duration that deal a certain amount of damage. If you don't know, landslide is this very tiny AoE ability. I'll just show you real quick. Just self-cast it right here. This right here, right, until you run out of spirit. It's just very, very tiny and punctual, and we transform that into a huge AoE. All right, so we got that set up, right? Why do I get 2 waves, though? The reason I get 2 waves is actually that I have this one right here. Landslide's earth pillars each strike a second time, basically doubling your damage, and then you, on top of that, you have a chance to hit an additional time, so even more than double damage. So the baseline of the build, pretty easy. There's just one problem, which is that Trample has a cooldown of 11.33 seconds. Are you just gonna stand around and chill and just kill packs every 11 seconds or so? No, there's another power that we can abuse, and that is this one right here. Now, this might look a little bit intimidating. I'll explain to you what this paragraph down here means. So Nature's Fury is a key passive right down here. It is this one right here. Casting an Earth skill has a 20% chance to trigger free Storm skill and vice versa. So okay, that doesn't seem too interesting, right? So you're gonna, I don't know, spam a random Tornado or some Landslide every so often. Yeah, you saw right here, I procced, I think it was an Earth Pillar or something. I give a 20% chance. Not that great. However, all we're using it for is this power right here. Whenever the Nature's Fury triggers, your non-ultimate cooldowns of the opposite type get reduced by 11 seconds. So what that means is that whenever I proc an Earth skill with a Storm skill, the opposite type, which is Earth, gets all its cooldown reduced by 11 seconds, and Trample is actually an Earth skill because of the first power we talked about. So for example, let's look at the cooldown of Trample right here. I just cast it, now I'm just wind shearing, and it's back up, right? So whenever I'm wind shearing, I basically have a 20% chance to reset it. Sometimes it's really fast, sometimes it takes a little, but whenever it's up, it's basically going to one-shot a pack. And you might think that's a little clunky in between packs, and it can be theoretically, but I want to make this clear that you understand. You don't have to hit anything with the Storm skill. You can literally, between packs, cast this in the air, and it's going to reset. You do not have to hit anything. So if you look at Trample, I'm just casting it to the air, and it's back up again. So now that you understand that, there's a few more things. We also have Landslide on our bar. We don't really have to, but we still do, because sometimes there are these situations, maybe I can find a situation like this, where you just trample in, right? And there's like a 1 mob left. Let's see if there's no mob left. God damn it. Okay, I'm just gonna try it here. So let's say there's like 1 mob left, and you're like, okay, so now I have to kill this again. Are you going to... Oh, there's a defensive mob right here. Give me 1 second. Maybe we can... Yeah, this guy's... It's like, I'm not gonna do a trample just for this guy, right? I'm just going to, I don't know, like landslide if I have the mana anyways, right? So that is what Landslide is kind of for. Let's say an elite lives at like 20-30%. You're not going to wait until your trample is up again. But otherwise, you don't really cast it, right? You really only cast it in those situations. Your Wind Shear is basically just there to proc your trample. Now, whenever you get unlucky and your trample, because it is a 20% chance, and your trample doesn't come back up, you can also Wind Shear enemies and then Landslide in between while waiting to have some good DPS uptime against single target and stuff like that. But that is in general what Wind Shear does. Because you don't need any spirit for your trample. I want to make that clear. Landslide needs spirit, but you don't need any when they are getting triggered from your trample. Now then we're using Hurricane, which is basically just there to reduce enemy incoming damage. Whenever we have it up, everything that gets hit by it deals 20% less damage. Really, really strong. It is also a Storm skill, so it can also reset the cooldown of Trample, just like Wind Shear. Another cool thing about this whole reset thing is it doesn't just say 1 Earth skill. It says just all non-ultimate cooldowns of the opposite type. That also includes Earthen Bulwark, right? So this is your defensive skill, but you can also reset that one. As you can see right here, it just went from 12 to 1 second. So you're going to have Earthen Bulwark up quite a lot, and you can stack quite a bit of Fortify and Barrier. And at the end here, we have Poison Creeper, which the Poison Creeper active is actually really, really important. Now, I'm just here like in the normal world tier, so I guess I'm going to try and show you. Yeah, there's a defensive mob right here, so they're not going to die right away. So I'm going to trample in, and I'm basically going to show you why Poison Creeper is so important. So you go in, right, and you pop the Immobilize immediately. And as you can see right here, they're all kind of like stunned, right? They cannot do anything. And that is important because if enemies move, it's a huge AoE, sure. But some of the enemies, especially on tier 4 and higher, kind of like duck out, right? Because they're more intelligent in those scenarios. And that's why the Immobilize comes in. They cannot move. Also, this makes it so the enemies are actually crowd controlled, which gives you extra buffs because you have like damage to crowd controlled enemies, critical strike damage to crowd controlled enemies, stuff like that. But with that out of the way, let's get into the nitty gritty. Let's start off with Wind Shear. There's not really a particular reason I'm using Wind Shear. You can use Storm Strike as well, which gives you 25% damage reduction. Now, personally, Storm Strike being melee was just really annoying. If there was no target nearby, it felt incredibly weird to reset my trample. So all I wanted is just have Wind Shear up. I can literally just cast it in the air because it's ranged. It just felt a lot better. But if you're like pushing very, very deep corruptions, I guess you'll have to do with Storm Strike. But even then, if you think about it, you have to go up to enemies and then you're going to get slapped way more. So in general, I just like Wind Shear way, way, way more. It also applies vulnerable here or there. We do have another source of vulnerable, but it's still nice to have, right? And it also gives us some much needed movement speed. Then we get to our main skill, which is going to be Landslide. Sure, we are going to cast Trample down here, but Trample does not deal any damage. The damage all comes from the landslides that we proc, and they all get buffs from the passive tree itself, right? Or from the skill tree itself. So yeah, this is basically just going to give you Pillars of Earth that deal a certain amount of damage. Now the first one here basically makes it so that if enemies are hit 4 times, they get immobilized. Once again, Poison Creeper is just there for consistency, but this also immobilizes enemies. And then we go for Primal Landslide, which is just insane. Basically, whenever you immobilize, stun, we don't really do that much stun, but immobilize an enemy, you get a Terra Mode charge, and that one gets consumed on your next Landslide, guaranteeing a crit with 40% multiplier to your critical damage. Against bosses, it's a little bit worse. It only has a 10% chance, but we're still melting bosses, so I didn't really feel a difference. In general, this makes crit a little bit less important to get, but in the situations where you don't have it up, which sometimes very rarely happens, it is still nice for consistency. Then our main defensive skill is Earthen Bulwark. It has an almost 13-second cooldown, but once again, this gets reset as well, just as Trample does. This gives you an extra barrier that absorbs. It makes you unstoppable, which is super important. And then on top of that, you also get some Fortify onto the small points in a second. Poison Creeper, this gives you an active that immobilizes enemies. Everything else doesn't really matter. And this cooldown also gets reset because of a certain boon that we have. More on that in a second. Then we have Hurricane, which is simply just a damage reduction tool, right? So enemies are slowed and enemies deal 20% less damage. Then we have Trample, which you don't really want to put any points into. We only have 1 point in here. I have like a random +3 from gear or something, but don't put more points into this. It is the movement skill that triggers all the landslides. It deals more damage, but it doesn't matter. Like, you get the Fortify from here, which definitely does matter, but in general, trample damage itself is nothing to write home about. And then at the end here, the Nature's Fury key passive, which makes all of this possible, as I explained in the intro. As for small points, we go for Predatory Instinct right here. This gives you extra critical strike chance against close enemies. Once again, you crit quite a bit, but when you don't, you really want to have this up. You get 9% damage reduction while in werebear form, which is quite a lot. Then we go through here. Resistances are mostly useless, it's just to get to here. 15% damage reduction for 6 seconds after using a defensive skill. Even though this has a cooldown, it gets reduced, so it's always up. And the damage reduction is also always up. Did I miss anything? I don't think so. Here is the strongest cluster. In total, this is basically the Earth cluster. 15% more damage to slowed, stunned, immobilized, or knockback enemies. Once again, solidifying why it's so important to always have enemies immobilized. Now, these nodes alone will basically make it so you're always topped up on Fortify, which is obviously incredible because you crit quite a bit. And then you have Stone Guard if your Fortify is over 50%. So basically always your skills deal even more damage. Down here, we have a few not so important ones. 12% more damage to elites, pretty nice. 12% more damage to vulnerable enemies, Nice. And then a little bit of extra recovery. Now, the recovery on this build is not perfect. You're going to have to pot here or there, but this helps a little bit with it. Next up, let's talk about boons. So first up, we have the 10% less damage taken from elites. Incredibly strong. Everybody takes this one. There's not really anything else to take. I specialize in here. I have the 5% critical strike chance, which just makes it more consistent overall. But I would definitely say that if you go deeper into Nightmare dungeons, I currently only go for like Nightmare 40 to 50, kind of just to grind XP. But if you want to go further, I would definitely take this. It's a more life multiplier. And then obviously the 30% more critical damage. Now then we have an interesting one, which is Pack Leader. Usually people take Energize here. However, we don't really need any Spirit for a Trample, right? And so we take this one here to reset our Poisonous Creeper over and over, basically making us be able to immobilize everything that we want. Down here, there's just not really anything to take. You can take Overload, which is a little bit of extra damage, I guess, but not really. Masochistic is not going to activate really at all, so this is just kind of useless. Now, going into items next. Once again, the 3 legendary powers that you need for the build is Trample, the Amulet here with the reset whenever Nature's Fury triggers, and you also need the Landslide down here. The Landslide is basically just a more multiplier to damage, but it literally doubles your damage. Just so you know, I actually started out without this one. It felt a little bit worse because you lose half of your damage. So try to get it as soon as possible. The roll doesn't matter. It's all just about basically double hitting. But what you need is this legendary aspect right here and this one right here. And you want to put it on your amulet. The normal roll is between 4 and 8, and this gets it from 6 to 12. Otherwise, let's look at what we're running. I have one unique in this build, but it doesn't really do anything. So Werebear form is now your true form, which means some of the damage reductions are a little bit more, I don't know, up all the time. And you gain +2 ranks to all Werebear skills, which is cute. But in general, this isn't really necessary. I just haven't really found a good rare body armor. The GG for this would be a normal body armor with some kind of defensive aspect and just get a ton of damage reduction mods, maybe life. Then we have the helmet with the stacking armor aspect. Just really, really good. Basically a no-brainer in every build. We have basic skills gain 30% attack speed. As you know, the more we can spam our wind shear, the more likely that we're going to reset the cooldown for our trample. So this one is just going to make the build feel a ton better, and your uptime of trample is going to be way, way, way better. Then you have this one right here. The duration of Earthen Bulwark is increased by 6 seconds. Not really necessary. It's more about whenever you kill an enemy, you replenish some of the barrier. This is especially good whenever clearing dungeons. And then at the end here, we're also using this one right here. Casting a Storm skill grants your Earth skills a certain amount of critical strike damage for 4 seconds. Since we're always alternating between Wind Shear and Trample, that is very strong. Next up for stat priority, my gear is pretty scuffed, so I basically wrote down a list. I'm going to show you what I have, but it's really not that great. Up top, you want movement speed and landslide levels. Whereas a lot of the werewolf builds get a ton of movement speed inherently, you kind of want to make that up on a bear with both having a movement speed roll in your boots. If you can get the movement speed after killing an elite, that's even better. But you also want the movement speed from Amulet. This will make the build just feel a lot better, and you can complete dungeons faster, which gives you more loot, which gives you better upgrades, and so on. You also need +2 landslide levels. I think you can only get these on gloves, but +4 would be incredible. After that, a little bit of cooldown reduction goes a long way. You might think, oh, we're resetting anyways, but if you look at the cooldown right here, right, with all the cooldown reduction I have right now, I'm scaling it down to 13 and 11, right, which is where I want it to be because this only resets 11 seconds. So we want to get the 14 seconds from Trample, and I think the 16 seconds from Earthen Bulwark down a little bit. CDR you can get from the helmet and also from your amulet, and if you're using one-hander plus offhand, also from the offhand. However, I would definitely go for a two-hander because it gives you a ton more damage because it doubles the effectiveness of this legendary aspect. After that, all the damage reduction mods that you can get. For example, these are my pants, damage reduction from distant, damage reduction from close, right? The more, the merrier. And damage reduction is usually better than just straight up getting life. And that is mostly because of how levels scale. Right now I have 9,600 life, and that's because at some point, like the life per levels goes up by, I don't know, like 10 or 20 every level, up to like 400 per level. It's crazy. So whereas early a life roll like this is very valuable and something I actually wanted to reroll into, later it gets a lot worse. Then we have Vuln and crit damage. Now, not only can you get normal crit damage, you can also get crit damage with Earth skills, which is incredibly strong. And other than that, vuln damage is just basically a more multiplier. It is incredible, and your vuln uptime is basically always. Also, attack speed is quite important. I think I have 15% on the gloves right here. You can also get basic skill attack speed from the helmet, which is basically all we need because we just need more attack speed for the wind shear to reset our cooldowns more. And then at the end here, you also want a little bit of lucky hit chance and crit just in case you don't proc the guaranteed crit sometimes. It is just nice to have. And lucky hit, the real only reason we need it is for this one right here, to reset our companion, which is quite important though. So one roll will probably do it. Now, when it comes to Paragon Board, I have a fully worked out thing that I want for level 100. We're going to go over this in a second. But just so you know, in game, until you get your glyphs leveled up, your priority is not really getting to the glyphs because it doesn't do all that much. It is getting Earthen Devastation up here in the Earthen Devastation board, and it is getting very efficient rare nodes. The only exception for glyphs is Exploit, which is incredible. It gives you vulnerable damage, and it also makes enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds 100% of the time, which is very nice for consistency. You can only apply it once every 20 seconds, but that is enough because we are very burst heavy. So yeah, as you can see right here, I leveled up a few glyphs, but I'm mostly just prioritizing very, very efficient rare nodes all across the board. And yeah, at some point I'm going to fill in all the glyphs. But let's look at the pre-made Paragon board here that I kind of theory crafted. First up, once again, this also has Exploit right here. We go through here. We also want a path down here because both of these starting nodes are actually really, really good. Both have life, and percentage life is just so premium. If you see right here, I have 13 points remaining. This is basically to fill out whatever you want in terms of like magic nodes or whatever. You definitely want to fill out all the 2% life nodes end game. You get a ton of flat life per level, so percentage life gets better and better over time. So then we path up here. Always make sure that you have the requirements ready. For example, here, 25 dexterity. You might think, why the hell am I pathing like this? It's so I have enough dexterity in the radius. Also, do note that if this is not level 15 or higher, the radius will go down, so it will be even harder to do. So get a ton of glyph XP from Nightmare Dungeons. Then we go here. This is the, once again, Earthen Devastation board. It's straight up 30% more damage. And here we actually go for Earth and Sky. This gives us 10% more damage to crowd control and vuln, which is always up. It also gives us a bonus to magic nodes, which are very efficient in here. This is all just critical strike damage, which is huge. These ones here aren't that great, but I did not find a better place to put Earth and Sky, and Earth and Sky is just incredible. Then we go further here. I do actually, this you could remove if you wanted to, but I really like having a little bit of damage over time reduction. Also later, you're probably going to take these two small nodes as well. I just really hate these poisonous spiders in endgame. They are so rough, especially on a build that doesn't have infinite recovery, right? Once again, damage to crowd-controlled enemies. You can already see a pattern why we want to have enemies always crowd-controlled. After that, we go into the inner beast right here. So Earthen Devastation was the only legendary node that we take. Everything else is not for the legendary. It is just for how efficient the nodes are and how we can travel around. When it comes to this, we go for the rare up here. We go for the Undaunted, which gives you damage reduction the more fortify you have, depending on how much you have, and then also increased damage while fortified. And then we go kind of up here to get the attack speed, and we really, really wanna, and I do this even though it seems like a waste, right? I'm not even going to the glyph, but I really want this damage reduction while fortified with the fortified generation. It is that strong. However, just so you know, this part here is the last points that you take. This is like level 100 stuff, right? Because I will assume that at this point, you're going to do very hard content and you want to get tankier. First, you're just going to grab the glyph and you're going to go down here through the critical damage and physical damage. You're going to grab all the good stuff along the way. Now, in terms of attribute requirements, at this point, it might get a little bit tricky because you need a certain amount of intelligence. You're going to get some from gear. Obviously, this doesn't have all the Lilith altars in it and how much base attributes you have. So you could be fine, but just make sure that maybe if you're missing like 10 or something, very often you can like redo 1 or 2 points the way you path and it's already fixed. But yeah, then let's go down here to the next glyph. And this one is going to be, oh my God, I have to zoom out so much here. That's kind of annoying. Spirit is once again incredible. It gives you a ton of critical damage. I felt like this is the best board for it, which is the Constricting Tendrils, because there's a lot of just like natural decks coming in here, and then you can just take this and you're done already. But if you can fit them in before, it is one of the stronger glyphs for sure, and it also gives you up to 12% more damage. We grab everything you can, once again with an emphasis on percentage maximum life and critical damage, and also percentage damage. It's also quite good. Here we have a very important board once again. We are taking the Protector Glyph, which gives you increased bonuses to rare mods, which in this case is reduced damage from vulnerable enemies. Whenever you see reduced damage on a board, highly likely that you want to have a glyph here that increases its effect, just because it's a highly sought after stat. The higher you go in Nightmare levels, the more you're going to need that damage reduction. And we kind of ended in here because this is just an incredibly efficient node. Do note, though, that this needs 530 intelligence, so if in endgame you feel like you cannot get there, you can scrap this altogether, and you can, for example, maybe make it work that you go here and get another glyph socket. As for leveling, this is my second character, so I got boosted to level 50. Basically, you ask a friend, they do a dungeon. All you have to do is stand at the start of the dungeon, and you just soak up XP. This game has no XP radius. You don't have to go with them and risk getting one-shot. You literally just stand there. It usually takes around an hour, and you're at level 50. And that is where you can now equip sacred items, and you're going to get strong. You can have a few legendary aspects, and you can go into whatever you want. But in general, what you can do is you can check out Maxwell's leveling guides right here and then take stuff that you need. I've also heard that Companion Druid is very good, so maybe look out for that on YouTube. Maybe somebody has a good guide about that. Should be really cozy while leveling. One thing I want to say, though, about Druid is that it's pretty harsh to level with, and that's simply because a ton of builds are gated behind legendary aspects. A lot of the end game ones are even hidden behind uniques that you have to find. So yeah, it is rough. That is why I chose to do Druid as my second character. If this is your first character, you should be very wary. You should have a lot of plans, right? If you start dropping pulverized items, you go pulverize. If you start dropping items for this build, go this build, or tornado, or whatever. You have to be a little bit more flexible, let's say. But yeah, I'll link the leveling guides from Maxwell in the description down below. But yeah, that's basically it for the video. I hope you have as much of a blast as I had with this build. It was the first build where it kind of felt like PoE, where you just had almost screen-wide AoE. I do kind of miss about Path of Exile. I wish this game had a little bit more AoE increases or additional projectiles, something that makes your build feel a little bit more fancy. But with that said, I hope you could learn a thing or two. Maybe you're going to play the build. Hope you have fun. And since I still never slogan, see you next time.